Welcome to Proclaiming Justice, a podcast from PJTN that focuses the light of truth on vital issues in today's headlines that impact every American. I'm your host, Laurie Cardoza-Moore, founder and president of Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, and I'm here to educate, motivate, and activate you to action. I want to arm you with the truth and the facts you'll need to fight and preserve our constitutional republic and uphold the Judeo-Christian values our nation was founded upon. America is on the front lines of a battle for our Judeo-Christian values. Our liberties and the future of our children and this republic hangs in the balance as we watch the complete meltdown of society by a Marxist takeover using disinformation and misinformation, especially in our children's classrooms. If we are going to win the war for the minds of our children and this republic, it will require Christians and Jews, people of faith and people of conscience to take their position on the wall and stand on our watch. We must not allow 1 inch of ground to be taken. It is for such a time as this that we have been raised up. Welcome to Proclaiming Justice, a podcast from PJTN that shines the light of biblical truth on vital issues from today's headlines that impact every American, Jew and Christian, people of faith and people of conscience. I'm your host, Laurie Cardoza-Moore. On this week's podcast, we are going to discuss critical race theory, how to recognize it, and what you can do to confront this growing threat to our children, our families, our communities, and ultimately, this country. To discuss this important topic, I have invited PJTN Senior Academic Fellow, Dr. Sandra Alfonsi, to help inform our audience about this threat to our children and the Republic. If you missed the last episode of this podcast, you will find it and our previous podcast lineup on our website at pjtn.org, as well as all the other platforms that you use to access your favorite podcasts. I also want to remind you to listen and share this and all of our previous podcasts with your family and friends so that they can become more informed about this and other related issues. Our goal at PJTN is to equip you to stand against the disinformation by taking back local control of your community and your children's and grandchildren's education. The first step to this process is education. We must become informed. Remember to visit our website daily to receive updates on all of PJTN's groundbreaking initiatives and programs, and sign up to receive PJTN's media and action alerts to share with family and friends. You can also follow us on all the social media platforms at PJTN. As a PJTN watchman, your action could make all the difference in the success of our global mission to combat the enemy that is trying to rob our children of their future. So please help me spread this vital information today. We are commanded to teach our children the Word of God, as stated in Joel chapter 1, verse 3. Tell your children about it, let your children tell their children, and their children, another generation. That's 3 generations who must be taught about God's covenant with Israel and their exodus from Egypt. Unfortunately, we have failed, and we are witnessing the evidence of that in our classrooms today. Our constitutional republic and its next generation of leaders are in jeopardy. There is a war being waged against our Judeo-Christian values and for the future of our nation's children, and the battlefield is America's classroom. Americans have been called to action, and PJTN is on the front lines. Our strategy starts county by county, state by state, to unmask revisionist history curriculum like Common Core and the 1619 Project, to reinstate curriculum containing foundational Judeo-Christian values, combat Marxist ideology and CRT in schools, and block antisemitism and Holocaust revisionist history in curriculum. So what can we do to take back local control of our communities? What are some actions that must be taken to reverse the course we are currently on? We are witnessing parents and citizens nationwide who are mobilizing to take back local control of their children's education. Even our government, the Biden administration, has issued a declaration of war against parents and citizens who attend local school board meetings to confront their school board members about the indoctrination of their children. And they are collaborating with the U.S. Department of Education, the National School Board Association, and the Attorney General in designating parents and citizens as domestic terrorists. Who is their target? Parents and grandparents, moms and dads. It's not the FBI and Antifa who instigated the January 6th insurrection in Washington, D.C. Or it's not those who murdered people in the streets of our cities and destroyed public and private property over the last 2 years. Nor is it the racist and anti-Semitic Black Lives Matter organization who launched a modern-day pogrom in Los Angeles. Have law-abiding citizens now become the target of our U.S. Attorney General? From Virginia to San Francisco, and many points in between, Americans are rejecting the indoctrination of our children with racist, anti-Semitic, anti-Judeo-Christian, critical race theory, pornographic, and social-emotional learning propaganda in our classrooms, and we will not be intimidated into silence. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome back to Proclaiming Justice, Dr. Sandra Alfonsi. Dr. Alfonsi, welcome back to Proclaiming Justice, all the way from Jerusalem.
Thank you, Laurie. Yes, I am in Jerusalem, and it's a pleasure to be with you and with PJTN. So I'm here. Thank you for inviting me again.
Yes, we so appreciate having you here again. And we've got a very important topic to discuss. And as you know, you've been very familiar with the growing movement called critical race theory, the curriculum that is being introduced to our children in the classrooms. And we just we wrapped up the CPAC conference here in Orlando this past week. And it was amazing, the parents that we spoke to that came to our booth that wanted information. Dr. Alfonsi, I hear the same thing from parents. I know that it's being taught to my children in their classroom. How can I recognize it? What are the characteristics? What are the common characteristics for me to be looking for in my children's curriculum to see if they are being taught critical race theory? What are your thoughts, Dr. Alfonsi? You've been studying this issue for quite some time, and if you were to describe critical race theory to these parents, what should they be looking for in their curriculum?
To answer this really bluntly, I think it's too soon for parents to be wondering how to recognize it when they haven't studied the base of it. And this is one of the strengths of the United States of being a constitutional republic. Marxism, communism was always over there. It was in the Cold War. It pitted the United States ideologically against Russia ideologically. And the parents of these children, these youngsters now, they have been educated by the same textbooks, many of them just another edition. And they really they cannot recognize critical race theory without first learning what it came from, what it comes from, understanding Marxism, understanding what is constructed, and go back to Marxism and go back to the Cold War. It was an ideology against an ideology. But the ideology of America was and is the base of the constitutional republic. The ideology of Russia and that area is that of Marxism. And that is what the parents must take what I would call, it's not even a refresher course. They need to have materials put out by you, by PJTN, something brief that gives them the background so that they know that unfortunately they cannot look at this from the mindset of an American coming from part of a constitutional republic. That which always was America and what the critical race theory and its proponents are trying to destroy We have to instill the knowledge of who we are and what America and the Constitution stand for if they are going to be able to recognize CRT and to fight it. So that is the first thing. And it isn't like go to college or go to school and study Marxism, but I believe that our first duty is to make sure that we put into the hands of every parent and put it out where people want to know what is it we're looking for. This is what we're looking for. First of all, critical race theory. It makes race the lens through which everything is analyzed in American life. So we have to understand that we are using a foreign camera, the camera of Marxism and the camera of communism, to look at everything inside American life, not for any other purpose than to destroy it. And that is something that we have to instill in the minds of the parents and the outside world, that the camera, the lens of the camera going through America is not for looking for America's strengths. It's looking for America's strengths, its ideology and everything for the purpose of doing one thing. It is the fall of the nation, the fall of America, the fall of the constitutional republic. So
Exactly.
this is what it is. And critical race theory looks at the politics. It looks at everything from the perspective of a nation driven by racial groups. Each one has specific claims on victimization, and that's where intersectionality comes. And the aggressors, those causing it, it's white society. And we have to go. I looked at this, I told you, I've been reading again and again, and I said, if it's if critical race theory is a modified form of Marxism, what was modified? And that the answer came out that Marxism, which I knew, but we find it difficult to put these two formulas side by side because we don't want to think of America as Marxist, and yet we have to understand that Marxism from Europe is imposing Marxism on the United States. And the worldview, it is the fact that CRT, this Marxism, American Marxism, and it sounds obscene to put the words together, but that's what it is. American Marxism is dividing people based on race and culture, whereas Marxism divided people according to class. And that's the difference. The worldviews are similar in everything else that's important, but the significance is that the people that are I like to use promulgating, but they seem to use promoting and perpetrating by people who are seeking their own power and their own aggrandizement at the cost of society and humanity. Now, if you look at Marxism, the Marxism, it cost the lives of at least 100 million human beings. That
Right.
Marxism. Now, if you take the new Marxism, which sounds strange, because the new Marxism is going on now between Russia and the Ukraine. And that is the new Marxism, which is doing the same thing and which is trying to wipe out. But it's still, no matter how you look at it, it's perpetrated by people seeking power and self-importance. And that is the same thing in the United States. You look at President Biden's handlers, and
Right.
it's exactly what they are. It's power, self-aggrandizement, and it is division of America by race, not by socioeconomic class. And that it's the same parallel, different words.
Yeah.
Now, how did we get it? And I'm laughing because I was troubled to find out that we got it, because it was like, I would call this a test tube or a petri dish. I would say that America's academia functioned as a petri dish. And a petri dish is used to grow something new, usually bacteria. So the Marxism in the 1960s, the Marxists, who were intellectuals, and why don't we call them by the correct term, the leftist intellectuals in the West, they realized that they could not impart on America what was over in the Soviet Union. And so there had to be a development and a change because they knew that the Soviet atrocities and the workers' revolutions just wouldn't take place or carry forth in the United States.
Mhm.
Now, a word to say about everyone gives an example of critical race theory, and they say, "Oh, BLM, Antifa, etc." No, they are not. What we're looking at did not grow out of them. They grew out of the violence inherent in the Marxism in the Soviet Union and in that area and in China. Their violence to destroy, their violence to go out and subdue, it came from the Marxism of the Soviet Union and China with the actual violence in the streets. So we have to make sure that we don't look, it's not that I don't want blame put on the Black Lives Matter, but we have to know where it came from, because it also has to explain how they allied themselves, and they continue to ally themselves with the Islamists, because they ally themselves where the violence is. And that is for self-aggrandizement.
Mhm.
So
Well,
we find out that
There's one thing I want to add to this as you're describing this, because there's also a parallel that we're watching, like what happened with Antifa and BLM and 1619. We're also seeing the rewriting, the revisionist history that is being rewritten as we speak. But I look back to, because I'm a student and teacher and documentarian of the Holocaust. And I look at the National Socialist movement and how Hitler and the Nazis came to power. How is National Socialism weaved into this Marxist ideology and agenda that we are witnessing? Is there a parallel to what we saw happen in Nazi Germany to what we're seeing happen and witness today?
the difference rather than the parallel. There are a lot of the socialist Marxist attitudes in there, because it also extended through other countries, and the desire to grow, for lack of a better term, to grow Germany. But the big difference is that the Marxist ideology was based on class, on class distinction. The Holocaust and the Nazis themselves, that much more closely resembles the Western Marxism now being imposed on the United States, because it was ethnic and cultural. It was the war against the Jews, and it was allied with Russian or Marxism, because it wanted to eliminate it. Basically, it looked like it was atheistic, but it wasn't. It was Christianity versus Judaism, and Hitler wanted to eliminate all traces of Judaism. So I would say that the certain parallels when they went into the other countries, when Hitler went into the other countries to conquer them, that was very much like what is going on and what has gone on in the Soviet Union and in China. The rest of it, the Holocaust, parallels the extermination of biblical times, but it does in itself, it is not socioeconomic and class. It is a form of race and ethnicity. So that it has both, which is why the lessons of the Holocaust are so popular in the United States, and why the anti-Semitism and the dangerous anti-Semitism, the visceral hatred and the physical destruction of property and such, that is part, and that is fed by the Marxism.
Right.
It's fed by, so that's where I think that's the best parallel I could come to.
Mm-hmm. So there's a, I'm thinking too about, critical race theory and the different components of it, what it looks like. Because, we want to try to break it down for our audience so that when they're looking at their children's textbooks or instructional materials or are sitting in and listening, auditing their child's virtual classroom, there are so many different aspects to how they are attacking every aspect of our culture, our society. And I think about, the 45, it was the report in Congress that was drafted back in the 60s. I believe it was 1963. It was the 45 communist goals for America. And when we break down the critical race theory, we see that it's, pitting races against one another. We see the anti-Semitic component. We see the anti-Judeo-Christian component. We see pornography. Our children are being subjected to pornography, the social emotional learning, that type of propaganda in our classrooms. And when you go back and you look at that report, Sandra, I mean, they're hitting those 45 goals. I think all of maybe one of those goals have been achieved. And it's disturbing to see that our children, our classrooms have become the battlefield. What are your thoughts with regards to the infiltration?
To say this, I'm going to say this first of all because you know where I come from, and I'm not speaking out of turn. I think that a major problem that has facilitated this exchange and this change, like in the introduction of the pornography and all of this, that what has facilitated it is the breakdown in religion, Judaism, Christianity, in the teaching of religion, in the implementing of religion, and in both the homes and therefore in the schools. And I think that this has opened the door because the Judeo-Christian tradition is one aspect of America, but I think even more important than that, which I believe is tremendously important, I'm not negating that. I think that when you take Judaism and Christianity and you look at the source for ethics, for morality, for social behavior, and you look at the development, if you just take the 10 Commandments and then go forward, you look at the teaching and the instilling right from wrong. And that I think is where we have failed tremendously in this country. I think that in the desire to pursue the freedom of religion, which is fine, that doing away with religion and mocking it and changing the in this case the Judeo-Christian, but changing the religious basis that this country was founded on, and not just the Judeo-Christian tradition, but the fact that there were so many who fled persecution, but at the same time, we had those who came in order to live a more religious, ethical life. And that is the element that has opened up. We cannot forget that Marxism, that they destroyed millions of people in order to destroy religious belief. That happened with the Christians, that happened with the Jews, it happened with the Hindus, with the Buddhists, that they have been, the religion and the ethics that they teach have been destroyed. And this is what I think we allowed to happen in the United States. We did not have, and we do not have, because I don't think we have them now either. We do not have religious leaders who know how to separate the performance of traditions in religion from the teaching and the maintenance and the maintaining of the morality and the ethics. And so our young people and the younger parents are all part of that. Our young people are devoid of a measuring stick, of a tape measure by which to measure performance, to measure. We try to teach civics without teaching the values that it's built upon. We try to teach tolerance while fomenting intolerance. And this is where I think, in my opinion, what disappeared from American society, which was at the essence of the colonial society,
Right.
is exactly the religion.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, Sandra, because Alexis de Tocqueville, a Frenchman, came over to the United States, as you well know, in the 1800s. He wanted to see why America was great. And we know history recounts that he traveled across the nation. And it was his conclusion, after spending time in the United States, in America, it was his conclusion that the reason why America was successful and why America was great was because Americans were governed by their faith. That whether, they were Jews or Christians, it's that Judeo-Christian ethic that governed our lives and really put boundaries in place to protect our freedoms, because liberty comes from the Torah, from the first 5 books of Moses. And those were the boundary markers, if you will, that always governed us. And that's what Alexis de Tocqueville thought was unique and was special about America. And he even admitted that France would never do that. France would never allow religion and politics to meet. But in our country, because the politicians were in the synagogue or in church on Sundays or Saturdays or Sundays, it was those very foundational truths, values, that helped to protect and keep our nation in check. And we've lost that. You hit the nail on the head. We've turned our back on it instead of embracing it. And we have allowed, in modern times, since really the 60s, to allow the Marxists to even do the same thing Satan did in the garden with Eve. Make them question their faith. Or, as Satan said to Eve, did God say that? And all you have to do is just plant that questionable seed and look at what has happened. We've lost the foundation. We're afraid to defend our Judeo-Christian values when in reality, it's like de Tocqueville said, it's those values that create the freedom for people from every different walk of life, from every nationality, people from around the globe who want to come to America, who have always wanted to come to the land of the free. Our ancestors, came over here, mine from Portugal and from Germany, because they wanted a chance at living free, and their children and their posterity to enjoy the freedom that America has always offered to its citizens. But unfortunately, you look at America's classrooms and you wouldn't recognize them. Our children are being subjected to pornographic material in order to groom them, to make them more sexualized, like the Kinsey report, like we saw with the Kinsey report back in the 60s. And now we have laws in place that have been in place since the 60s that protect teachers, educators, librarians, under the guise of, sex education, to be able to teach this pornographic content, and there is no consequence to them. However, if, for example, if there was a man in a van across the street from a school and the kids left the school property and he approached them and handed them pornographic material, he would be immediately arrested and tried for crimes against children. And of course, if the child is on the property of the school and the teacher or the librarian or an educator were to hand that same material to that student, that child, they would not be arrested because they're protected under the laws that have been passed. And many people don't know that there is a law in place that enables, because of sex education, that it enables these teachers, these educators, these librarians to subject our children to this pornographic garbage.
Your thought?
Another thing about the pornography, first of all, sexuality is a means of domination, and it is also a way by which you turn a person into a possession. And it also functions like a drug. And I think that the pornography is being used for those purposes, to turn people, and starting as children, to turn them into a possession, to turn them from a person into a thing, to remove their human characteristic, and to reduce it into the characteristics of the animal world. And I also believe that, like liquor, but easier to use, because the liquor you have to buy, you have to have money, you have to do this and that to get it. I think that pornography is being used as a drug, and the purpose of drugging our young people is to eliminate the ethics, the morality, the self-esteem, the belief in themselves. This is all part of the pornography, is to turn our young people from thinking individuals into, I hate to use the image of, into a sheep-like world where they become the followers. You're using drugs, you're using sex, you're using the human body to earn money with, and they pimp out the children get money. All of this turns them into an army, a different kind of army, but it still turns them into an army. And I think that is the place. And if you give them the pornography in a school, take for example the book that you and I discussed, Me, Earl, and the Dying Girl. If you hand it to them in a school and you make it part of a reading list, or then it's considered in class, and it means that it's okay. It means that it's okay for that to be done. And this is the message. And this is a form of body control for mind control, if I can use that analogy. That is what I think. And I also think that, to go back to our Judeo-Christian tradition and such, if we go back to the founding fathers and the writing of the Constitution, and the critical race theory, which deems the United States as systemically racist, and that it is Marxist by race and class. And we go back to the founding fathers, when they wrote the Constitution, they labored and they struggled so to balance exactly the class, which would have been modern day Marxism. They left the door open. If they had not written the Constitution the way they did write it, there would not have been a door open from the time of the Constitution to the time of the Civil Rights Movement to finally address color and culture, race and culture. And I think that that's something which we need to go back to. Yes, they owned slaves, but they were part of the answer to resolve that without destroying the economy of what was the nascent United States at that time. And we have allowed ourselves to be so blinded by it's racist, that we now have vocabulary anti-racist, which is really racist, because it's what makes white supremacists, and it makes the whole problem on the heads of the white people. Yes. But if you look at our Constitution, the founding fathers, they left that door open. They showed exactly the character, the training, the religion, and
Mhm.
they left the door open for greater thinkers than they to
Mhm.
be able to address this problem and to do our best to eliminate it. So that's those are some of my thoughts about that.
Yeah. Well, as we're getting ready to wrap up the program, and Dr. Alfonsi, I so appreciate your insight and your thoughts, and it really helps our audience to grapple with this and what to look for. So I just want to, remind everybody that as we're looking into our children's curriculum and we're listening to the vocabulary of our children, what they're talking about, the vocabulary of school board members and the vocabulary of educators in our public school system, when we're looking for evidence of critical race theory, as Dr. Alfonsi said, it is about dividing the races. It's about, white privilege. We've seen it with the ethnic studies model curriculum in California, where they're even pitting Jews against one another, where Jews who come from Europe that are lighter skinned are considered white privilege, where Jews who come out of the Middle East who have darker skin, then they fall under the protective guidelines. But it's insidious how they are dissecting. And so when you're looking at your children's curriculum, and it's very important, and we're here at PJTN to assist you, but you want to look for terms like white privilege, anti-Semitic innuendo or degrading of the Jews. You want to look for anything that is anti the Judeo-Christian values that our nation was founded upon. And Dr. Alfonsi started out the program telling us that we need to research, we need to go back and read the books. We need to read Howard Zinn. We need to read these the 45 goals to take over America, that report that is still part of our congressional documents, the 45 goals of taking over, of a Marxist takeover of America. You want to look for pornography. You want to look and see if there is what kind of content is being introduced to our children and how it's being introduced. Because, we've seen here in Tennessee, we have 3 counties where we've recently had to address the issue of anti-Semitism, pornography. It's outrageous that this is going on, even in the belt buckle of the Bible Belt. But the other thing also you want to look for is the social emotional learning. Our schools should not be teaching or advising our children privately, or even with parents, about the social emotional well-being of their students. That is the responsibility of the parents or the grandparents. It's the responsibility of the family. It is not the responsibility of our educators or our education system. The responsibility of the education system is to teach our children how to read, how to write, how to add and subtract, because the responsibility of every generation in America, and we all knew this growing up, that it is the responsibility of each generation to pass the baton of the republic to the next generation. And we do that through education. It is our responsibility to make sure that we govern over the affairs of our education system, to ensure that the education system is actually doing its job. We need to get the federal government out of local education and even state education. It should be the states and our local school districts that should determine what our children are taught, how they're taught. We've got to get the federal government and their funding out of the classroom. And this is so critically important. So, ladies and gentlemen, we, as I said earlier, we cannot be intimidated into silence by these people. We, the people, parents and citizens, must stand up and confront this evil. And we cannot tolerate, we should not be sitting back and allowing this to happen and letting them win the argument. We know what is right and we know what is wrong, and we need to stand on that. Dr. Alfonsi, your closing comments, what would you have to say to our audience as parents and citizens are, having to confront this issue in their children's classroom and in their community and with their school board?
I will say very honestly, and it's difficult to carry through with this, but the danger to our children in critical race theory, it's not what is in the textbooks, because that can be handled. The danger is that textbook in the hands of these teachers. And we have to find a way, whether we go to the PTA meetings, whether we talk to our children when they come home from school about the language used in the classroom. And we have to be able to see a book has written words, the teachers speak, and the books that are digitalized, parents can also listen to them and see them. But we have to teach, we have to learn how to identify whether in the classroom your children are learning, hearing the abbreviation. This is about pox and people of color. That is vocabulary. They have to learn to such terminology as white teachers, and I'm saying this, white teachers are guilty of, quote, the spirit murder of Black children, end quote. There is a language, there is a live language of critical race theory that we have to learn, and the parents and those who are fighting this and educators who are trying to fight it are as unknowing as many people are. So I would say that, yes, we are going to do our best to locate this and to identify this in the textbooks, but it's the textbook, or it's actually the teacher, with or without the textbook, that is the one that brings it into the classroom and teaches it. So that's my closing, is that it's a CRT, critical race theory, is a living language. It's a living ideology. It's a living philosophy, and it is cancer bearing, and it is throughout the United States and in the school system. It is not only in the books, it is in the hands and the language of the teachers and the administrators, but I'm going full force with the use of the word teacher. So that is what I would say, that there has to be an awareness that what we thought once upon a time it meant to be a teacher, it has a different, it is a different meaning now. And the teachers that try to maintain what teaching was and what morality is, they're the ones that are suffering the most. So I would say, familiarize yourself with the language of CRT. Talk to your children, not to scare them, not to threaten them, but find out. I'm now, that's one of the things I'm doing. I said to someone the other night on the phone, have you ever heard the term POC in your classroom? And so this teacher said to me, well, it did come up. I said, how did it come up? Well, in relationship to teaching about the Jews coming from the Middle Eastern lands, they were referred to as pox. And I said, you know what it means? And she said, no, actually I don't. I said, it means people of color. So this is what I mean about learning the language, so that, and we're so good on acronyms in the States. Everything these letters stand for, and we don't even bother. We learn the acronyms without knowing what they mean. So this is what I would say. We will do our best, we being you and PJTN and I, we will do our best to identify the books and to work with the publishing houses. But to the parents and the grandparents and people who care, this is a living ideology and a living language, and we have to be aware of both.
Yes, absolutely. Dr. Alfonsi, thank you so much for joining us. It's always just a blessing to have you. The insight that you provide to each one of us is amazing and encouraging. It's inspiring because you give us hope that we can fight this battle. We have to know our enemy. We have to know their strategy in order to defeat them. And so it's great to have you on our team, and it's great to have you back on the show. And I'm going to have you back on the show soon, because this problem is not going away anytime soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me. Bye.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to encourage you to go to our website to learn more about how to take back local control of your children's education. Ultimately, it starts with you. If you are interested in hosting a summit in your community to help educate, motivate, and activate your county to flip your school board, now is the time to do it. This is an election year, and now is the time that we must act. There's going to be many school districts, school board races that are going to be coming up this year and even next year, even if your school board has already had its election. Now is the time to start preparing for the next election cycle. I hope you enjoyed this program. We are going to post this podcast on our website and with all of our podcasts, and of course on all of our platforms, so that you can share it with your family and friends. As PJTN Watchmen, we have a biblical mandate to stand against the ungodly rising Marxist threat that is destroying this nation and threatening our Judeo-Christian values. We cannot remain silent. God warned the prophet Ezekiel about the responsibility of the watchman, that they are responsible. When you, as a watchman, you are informed and you are educated, you have to warn the inhabitants of your community. You have to warn your family and your friends, your neighbors, because if you don't and any innocent blood is shed, God will require it of you. But if you warn the watchman, or if you as a watchman, you warn the inhabitants of the city, of your community, your family, your friends, your neighbors, and they refuse to listen, then it will not be required of you, but it will be held on them. And as a watchman, you can sound this alarm. Dietrich Bonhoeffer reminded us that silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. In closing, don't forget to join us for next week's podcast as we continue this conversation about combating the rise of anti-Semitism and taking back local control of our communities and our children's education. I want to also remind you that if you have not signed up to become a PJTN Watchman, you can help support this effort and more programs like this for just $20 a month. With your generous monthly donation, you can ensure that PJTN remains on the front lines and in the headlines. But we can't do it without your faithful prayers and financial support. I hope that you will prayerfully consider supporting our mission as we educate to activate Jews, Christians, and all people of conscience to stand on the front lines of this all-encompassing war. I want to leave you with the sobering statement by Abraham Lincoln when he said, "The philosophy of the classroom in one generation will be the philosophy of the government in the next." God bless you, and thank you for all you do on behalf of our Jewish brethren, the State of Israel, and these United States. Thank you again for joining me on this edition of Proclaiming Justice. Please share this podcast with your family and friends. For more information about how you can get involved, please visit our website at pjtn.org. As a PJTN Watchman, you can help us keep up the fight to preserve our freedom for our children and their children for such a time as this.